I never thought I'd see people floating in the air, but I did. And no one believes me. There's a village deep in the forest, not far from where I grew up. People always warned me about it. They said it was cursed. They called it the Village of the Wind, but the real name was Kewanji. They said that if you went there at night, you'd never return. I always thought it was just a story, until I saw it for myself. It started when my cousin, Kofi, disappeared. He went out to collect wood one evening and didn't come back. At first, we all thought maybe he had lost track of time or gotten distracted. It wasn't the first time someone had gone missing in the woods, but usually, they found their way back by morning. But when morning came and Kofi still wasn't home, I knew something was wrong. Everyone else assumed he'd gotten lost or maybe even wandered into another village. But I knew better. Kofi grew up in these parts, just like me. He knew the forest like the back of his hand. He wouldn't have just gotten lost, and he wouldn't have left without telling someone. The only place he could have gone, the place no one dared mention, was Kewanji. I tried to convince myself it was ridiculous. All the stories I'd heard growing up about the witches who lived there, the strange things that happened when the wind howled at night, were just that, stories. But something in my gut told me I needed to go. I couldn't sit back and wait for another day to pass, not knowing if Kofi was out there, in danger. So, one night, I grabbed a torch and set out into the forest. I didn't tell anyone where I was going because I knew they'd try to stop me. As I walked, the trees seemed to close in on me, and every rustle of leaves or snap of a twig made my heart jump. But I kept going. I had to find Kofi. After what felt like hours, I started to notice something strange. The air around me got colder. And I don't mean a little cooler like it does at night. I mean freezing, like the kind of cold you feel in the dead of winter. But it was the middle of the dry season. That's when I saw it, the lights. They weren't far ahead, glowing between the trees like fireflies, but they didn't flicker or move. They just hung there, steady, almost waiting. I thought they were torches at first. Maybe it was another village, or a search party looking for Kofi. But as I got closer, I realized they weren't torches at all. They were people. At least, they looked like people. Floating, just above the ground. Their bodies were stiff, and their eyes were wide open, staring straight ahead. I wanted to scream, but the sound got stuck in my throat. My legs felt like they were glued to the ground. I couldn't move. There were about 5 of them, men and women, floating in the air like they weighed nothing. Their arms hung limply at their sides, and their faces were pale, almost ghostly. And then I saw Kofi. He was one of them. His body floated above the ground, just like the others, his eyes open but empty. His lips were slightly parted, but he wasn't breathing. He wasn't blinking. He wasn't there. It was like something had taken his soul and left his body behind, like a puppet on invisible strings. Before I could process what I was seeing, I heard footsteps behind me. I spun around, my heart pounding, and saw a woman standing in the shadows. Her skin was dark and smooth, but her eyes were pitch black, like deep, bottomless holes. She smiled at me, but it wasn't the kind smile. It was a knowing smile, like she was in control of something I couldn't even begin to understand. "You shouldn't have come here," she whispered. Her voice was soft, almost gentle, but it sent a chill down my spine. I tried to speak, to ask her what had happened to Kofi, but no words came out. My legs were still frozen, and my chest felt tight, like the air had been sucked out of my lungs. "You came for your cousin, didn't you?" she said, stepping closer. "He belongs to the wind now. Just like the others." The wind. That's what they always called it, the village of the wind. But I never understood what they meant. Now I did. The wind wasn't just air moving through the trees. It was them. The witches. They controlled it, used it to take people, to claim them for whatever dark power they served. The woman stepped even closer, and I could see her face more clearly now. She didn't look old, but there was something ancient about her. Like she'd been around for longer than any human should be. "You don't belong here," she said, her voice low. "But you've seen too much." I tried to back away, to turn and run, but my feet wouldn't obey me. It was like the ground itself had me trapped. The wind picked up, howling through the trees, and I felt it tugging at my clothes, pulling me towards the floating bodies. Towards Kofi. Towards whatever fate had claimed him. I wanted to scream, to fight, but there was nothing I could do. The wind was stronger than me, stronger than anything I'd ever felt. It was like it had a mind of its own, wrapping around me like invisible hands. Just when I thought it was going to pull me up into the air, just like Kofi, the woman stopped. She raised a hand, and the wind immediately died down. The cold lifted, and I could move again. But I didn't run. She tilted her head, studying me, as if deciding what to do next. Then, she spoke one last time. "Go home. Tell them what you saw. But no one will believe you." And with that, she turned and disappeared into the darkness, leaving me standing there, trembling. I didn't wait. I ran. I ran faster than I ever have in my life, not stopping until I burst through the trees and back into my village. When I told my family what I saw, no one believed me. They said I was in shock, that I was imagining things. They held a funeral for Kofi, but his body was never found. Every night, I dream of those floating bodies, of Kofi's empty eyes staring back at me. And every night, I hear the wind howling, calling my name. They are waiting for me to come back. But I never will.